Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, Adi Klevit here with the System Simplified podcast, where we interview top entrepreneurs, founders, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And this podcast is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group. At Business Success Consulting Group, we create custom processes and tailor-made business systems so businesses can thrive and grow.
And today's guest is Matt Schwartz. Hi, Matt.
Hey, Adi. How are you?
Good. Great to have you today.
Thanks.
And Matt, yeah, absolutely. So, Matt, you are the founder and executive director of Constructive, which is a brand strategy agency for social impact businesses, nonprofit foundations, right? You help them create their impact in the world.
Yeah, we're a brand strategy and design. So we do a range of integrated design from visual identity and communications design and a lot of large scale interactive work, websites, and some complex engineering as well. So effectively helping brands in the social impact space really know themselves well and then articulate what that's about through words and visuals, and then designing the interactive experiences that connect people to their work.
Fantastic. All right. So we are going to have a conversation about systems, and, you are very big on systems. So we're going to talk about how you use systems in order to help your clients, how systems are affecting your internal culture, and why systems are so important for businesses, right? In order for them to grow and scale and do well and service the target market that they want to service, because you obviously have it very well defined, and you have, you're there to help. You are helping the people that help others, which is definitely an incredible thing to do, because it's definitely very satisfying, right? When you have that ability to help others.
It's the groups, the organizations and people that we work with and the issues that they work on are, one of the biggest, if not the biggest part of why we do what we do. It's definitely rewarding to do this type of work, for sure.
Absolutely. All right. So let's start talking about systems and what kind of systems do you have that you feel like create the biggest impact on servicing your clients?
So I think probably a good way to start with this, Adi, is to say that, I started Constructive out of my living room. So, in the very beginning, 23 years ago, it was just me. And so the only system was me doing whatever I could do to, engage and bring in new business and do the work and produce it. And I was doing every role. And so when companies start that way, and you may have listeners who that resonates with, you build up based on what you know. And over time, if you're successful, the company matures, you bring in people with new perspectives, you learn how to handle scale in work, you learn how to manage multiple work streams and teams and all of these types of things. And it gets more and more complicated. So I'll start by saying when I began Constructive, I had none of that and probably didn't even realize how useful it was. For us now as a company, I just think there are a lot, and I'll probably miss plenty of them. I may misrepresent some, but, I think the first thing is to say that you've got human systems or human processes that you turn into a system of doing things. And that's probably one side of the equation. You've got systems that are technical, let's say, and technologies that you might use. You even have work product, I should say, probably in the middle of that is some of the ways that you produce work, and your approach to the work that you produce can be systems based and can really benefit the outcomes, that support the outcomes you're after. So, I'll maybe put a few of them at a high level, and we can drill into it as you see fit. The first is to say that, our first system, we're a knowledge services business, and, we are in strategy and creative and engineering and this kind of thing. And we have to develop really good systems for how you move work through everything that we do, and having good ways to set that work up, orient people into what that work will be, set them up for success, and have awareness for how to work with the clients and each other to do that. And then to make sure that the work that gets produced meets our standards of quality and our clients' goals and needs, and really the needs of their audience and their mission ultimately. So, for us, that's everything from a system that ensures a really good business development to, we say, production or project management handoff, because I'm the person who has the vast majority of conversations with new clients when they come in. And so I get to know them for the first time, and I read their RFP, perhaps. I learn what their situation is. I understand a bit of what they're hoping to do. I might give them some feedback about how to think about things a little differently. All of that stuff in a conversation that eventually becomes a proposal. If the project is awarded to us and we're working with that group, we have to have a way to get people set up internally to know what's going on. So we have a thing called a project charter. And so the project charter is something that's worked on between me and a project manager to lay out all of the assets and information and knowledge about the organization, about why they engaged us, about what we talked about doing, and some other supporting things, and getting together to talk about that. And that asset becomes something that everyone on the team that's going to be involved in the project can reference. So if you think of that and just scale it all the way through to the ways you can think about how teams get together, organize, what the cadence of meetings are, how we put all of our tasks and deliverables and milestones into technical products, that's one side of it. So I'll stop there, because then I talked about the work product approach and then maybe some of those technical platforms. But I really think at the crux of it, when you're an enterprise that involves people doing knowledge-based work together in the services industry, your first and best system is the process and the structure by which you communicate with each other and make sure you're all working together well to deliver something that is great for the client and your end results.
I agree. I mean, the first, definitely that movement of knowledge, or the transfer of knowledge internally, is very important. We do a lot of knowledge transfer, but it's usually the knowledge transfer that we talk about is the transferring of information when about that position. So somebody else can assume it, or somebody else can take over, or somebody else, or it can be transferred to somebody else. But there are all those points in an organization when the knowledge gets transferred inside the organization. And it's very important that it gets passed correctly and that it can be duplicated by the next person in line. It's kind of like a relay race. And it's very important that that information doesn't get changed, doesn't get altered, it doesn't become something else, and it's complete. So that is really, I think that's a key to good customer service, right? To really take care of the clients, because then that's the way you can scale, because otherwise I'll be the client and go, oh yeah, well, I told Matt everything, but now Matt understood me. But let's say Jane, who is now in charge of my account, she doesn't understand, because I don't feel like everything I said, I already said it. I don't want to repeat it again, right? I mean, those are all those things that clients can voice, but the problem is that there was no knowledge transferred internally. So I think that is an incredibly important system to implement, especially between the sales and operation.
Yeah, I'll go further on that, just to say, because this has been coming up recently, and I think it's particular to our, not exclusive, but it is a big factor in our work and in any multidisciplinary field. So our work involves strategists, research experts, strategists, designers, UX designers, and visual designers. It involves writers. It involves engineers, right? Programmers. And in particular, when you do digital work, first of all, there's always in any strategic endeavor, the migration or the handoff of what we create, a strategic brief, the essence of what the strategy must accomplish or is after, that needs to be embodied by everyone working on the project, right? So that's the through line, whether you're writing words, designing something, or writing code. There are strategic priorities and goals, and they're in a strategic brief. So that, first of all, that handoff, what I say, not having a drop off between strategy and execution, that's that first part. And that's something that just takes time to make sure that people are referencing the strategy and going back to it and making decisions based on that. And that's important. And that's a part of the system. The other thing that happens is that when you are designing and building things in digital in particular, the UX team might make a bunch of wireframes. The design team then makes visual design. The development team has to be involved in those things early on. They actually have to be involved in the strategy phase, because what happens a lot in digital, I've been working in interactive now for more than 23 years. Constructive's been around for 23 years. And what you find is that things can break down or they become really hard to do. Budgets get blown. And the area where that happens the most is between UX and visual design getting completed, and at a lot of places that gets dumped on development, and the development team is sort of like left having to figure out how to make it all work, and they have to make the budget that they have available work with what they've been given. And if they haven't been consulted enough, that interface between design and engineering is fraught with breakdowns. And so we've spent a lot of time over the years, and it's one of these things you always work on, and that is how to get that 3-part interface between strategy, design, and development programming to be holistic. So that transfer from sales into the company, yes. And then once you're within your team, any team that's multidisciplinary, the work that one team does affects the work that another team will have to do. And so you have to have ways to limit that getting out of control and creating a problem that results in bad work or good work, but completely over budget.
Absolutely. I agree with you. And for our listeners, obviously you're talking about more like the terms that you were using will apply to an agency or digital marketing, or it's like the brand, building the brand strategy and the engineering and this and all of that. But it definitely applies to other industries as well. So maybe you don't have the engineering and the designers and the UX, but you can apply to any business, right? Even
Absolutely.
In construction, if you have the design don't really communicate to the build part, and then within the build, the different subcontractors. So I think we all understand that, right? So it's really the element of passing the information along and being in coordination. So what would be some of the systems that can inspire our listeners, that you were able to implement, that you feel like those are the systems that help you overcome that barrier? Or maybe it's not overcome completely, but you still have it there in place and you are making it better and better. What would be some of the coordination or the relaying of information systems that you have in place in order to make sure that everybody's in communication?
So there are a couple things that we've implemented over the years. I don't think they're unique to us for sure. The first is just having a weekly, at least, stand-up. Some teams will have daily stand-ups to talk about what they're doing, like the engineering team. But as far as project reviews go with the project team, a weekly stand-up of 15 minutes or so with the project manager leading it. They're the through line that understands everything that's going on and is keeping context for everyone. Those are obviously invaluable. There are cross-disciplinary meetings to include members of other teams to understand what might be going on. So this is something we're increasingly doing more of, and that would be to make sure, for example, that engineering is consulted on things and then they are brought into something to make sure that design decisions are going to be reasonable to execute and offer ideas outside of that. So that's just good old collaboration and meetings and doing them along the way at certain milestones. I think the other things that we've done is strengthening documentation. Specifically, we try to keep it lean, but I would say annotation of intent throughout our documents I'm talking about design documents when they're handed off. Design needs to get good specs where type scales and the color systems and things are listed, creating design patterns, and we can get into design systems and how that benefits scaling for the work that we produce. But a lot of it is just taking a systems-based approach to how you think about what you're making, and then having check-ins throughout the process to make sure that people are aware of what's being decided upon on something that's going to get to them before it gets to them. Outside of that, there's, of course, just typical project management software type things. We use Asana now. We've used other platforms over the years. Right now, Asana is the one we're really enjoying. And those are things that are just good communication tools, using things like Kanban boards and allowing people to understand the flow of what's going on in work, and also have clearly documented things so that there is a history to go back on and look at what's been done and what deliverables are available to reference, which is obviously common for lots of agencies.
Absolutely, and businesses too, but I think it's important to actually say what they are, because that's the truth. It's very simple. You have the coordination meetings, you have documentation so people can follow. It creates consistency, it creates predictability. You can also train people easily. You can make sure that if something is not going right, you can always go back and refer to it. And using some kind of a platform like Asana, I use ClickUp. Many of my clients also use Monday.com. So either one of those platforms, so even a platform that you create yourself, which is fine if you have something that is more like I work with clients that they will create their own software. They had like their software developed specifically for them. But whatever it is, it captures the flow. It captures the documentation, so you can actually have it documented and understand what needs to happen. And it's also a great way of communicating. Like, for instance, internally for us, I apply the same thing. We have a client, we work on documenting their processes. So let's say I do the interview, then I create the notes in ClickUp, then the writer will read it, so there will be the communication. She will process it, write it back there. I understand what is happening, or the consultant is on the case will read it. So it's like that communication. It's great to use those tools because they're very flexible, right? I mean, you can move the task from one board to another. All the information can move to wherever it is on the project. And that's why it's a project management, because it makes it easy to manage the project that way.
Yeah, something you said there you were talking about, easy to train people, et cetera, and bring them into projects. I think actually that's an important one that I haven't mentioned. And if Constructive's director of technology, Daniel, were here, he would have a lot to say about this. I dubbed him King Scale because he is very interested in scaling properly, not scaling just because we want to get big, scaling to do it well, because that's how you can succeed. And in engineering in particular, that's, one of the areas you can do it extremely well. And I think, pulling from what he's been talking about a lot in our leadership meetings and such, when it comes to engineering, the way things are built and having effectively a framework, a tool that we are creating that is probably the best example. You asked about what are we doing that helps us. And it's funny that I didn't think about this, but effectively, we are building and have been building for some time a technology platform. It's really just, an integrated series of a content management system and UX design patterns and functionality that's a basis for beginning design evolution. And so it's built on WordPress, and it has a host of the things that we know we need to build and create often. It's fully decoupled so that the front end and the back end are separated. So a back end engineer can work on that while people working on the front end code that shows up in the browser are doing that. And what's important to him and important to us for success is that it be designed and documented and explained and built in a way that other developers can easily step in and take over projects. And so I think when you think about scale in a lot of ways is about risk management. And so, it's that hit by a bus syndrome. If somebody who's working on something is hit by a bus or, just is unavailable for a long period of time, and they're the only person who understands what's going on. And the code, something like that could be very complicated to step into, and someone can't figure it out. You lose a lot of time. And so this platform that we're building, I call it Site Builder, but it's yet to be named. But this is really our foundational tool for all our digital projects. And you can actually apply the same to the ways we build our tools and frameworks and our assets for our brand strategy decks and all of the things that are our tools and assets for what gets populated. And there are things that feed into that, spreadsheets and such, where you're collecting data, using Airtable for research, a research database. When we're doing brand research and interviewing stakeholders, we're putting all of that content to all of the answers to all of the questions into Airtable, organizing it, tagging it, using it then to find patterns and connect ideas and create themes that become the foundation of a brand strategy. And that then gets dropped into or written into a framework for presenting a brand assessment that is a big written strategic document. Well, there's a whole system and process. And the more clear you are on what the end looks like, meaning that document, and what the inputs are, all that research, and what the intermediary is, which would be that Airtable database, that's going to make it easy not only for people to work on it, but if someone needs to go back and find research that relates to something, they can get to it. The same applies in visual design and tools we might use. And very clearly, as I explained with our code base, how you build that makes it easier to have developers step in and, in fact, allow developers who might be a little bit less senior than the people who built it thrive using that, because it's set up so that someone with less expertise can do really good work. So, there's so many benefits to thinking about and approaching stuff that way. And over the past number of years, we've really tried to lean into that. And I will say, being distributed, that has really emphasized it even more, because we're not in the same room physically talking to each other as we were for the first 20 years of our existence.
Absolutely. That's right. You definitely have to have it so remote teams can work on it as well. Speaking of remote teams and speaking of, creating all those systems, how does it affect the culture internally in Constructive?
I love that question, and I'll tell you why, because right now it's so great. And we just had our leadership retreat. We have an annual leadership retreat, virtual. It was just the past 2 days, so Wednesday and Thursday. So I'm coming off a little bit of a high on that. But this has been for some time. We were always on site in New York City in the Woolworth building, design agency. I love the office vibe. I'm kind of a bit of an extrovert and just enjoy that rapport and that energy. And so when we had to change like everybody else, you're feeling your way through it. And over the years now, right now we're a fully distributed remote agency. We will be likely forever. Maybe we'll have a home base at some point, but right now we don't. Our hiring is more diverse and more spread out. And we've found some people that we would not have found, or at least been able to hire easily otherwise. And that's all great. That doesn't speak to the culture though. So to how some of this affects culture, and you think about your entire culture and how you run your company and your operations as a system, and HR and how people management is part of that. So all I can say is that in the time since we left our office and went remote, actually the culture is better than it was. And it's not because, oh, great, we're not on top of each other or in the office together anymore. It's not that. It's that we have better people. I think we're more intentional about how we cultivate culture and community. A friend of mine says company is community, and I really like that phrase, and I try to embrace that. And so we just have really great leaders across the different parts of our company, and each of them really is a great steward for and their team, and they really care about them. And collectively, I just think we feel really bonded right now. That's my sense of it. And so, our tools for all of that, it's Slack, Google Hangouts, Zoom, just like most everybody's using, right? And then we do in-person stuff occasionally. We had an in-person retreat at the end of last year in Austin. So the culture is great. The tools are working well. There are hiccups. I'll say if there's anything when you think of these automated systems, this is an interesting thing and we're going to work it out. Project managers will put together an entire project and put it as it's getting ramped up, and they'll put it into Asana. And when they put it in, they'll put all the tasks in. And somebody gets then a torrent of emails of tasks that have been assigned to them, but the project hasn't even really kicked off yet, and they don't know what these are, and it causes anxiety for them as soon as they get it. We were talking about this just the other day. And so the experience of what it's like for one person on one end versus the other when there isn't that immediate communication, that can create a little breakdown. And so I think learning what each other's experience is when stuff gets done, that's part of the systemized approach, like putting a project into Asana and setting it up so that we understand what the sender is doing and what the receiver is getting and that kind of thing. I think that's one area that we're going to look more closely at, and I think everyone probably would benefit from.
Absolutely. Well, that's part of it, right? I mean, it's having the systems, but constantly monitoring it, making sure that all those things that do not work, what can we do in order to make them work? That's part of being a manager.
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, Matt, how can our listeners find you, and how can they find Constructive?
They can find us at constructive.co, not .com, constructive.co. We have a company page on LinkedIn. We're on Instagram. It's Hey Constructive on Instagram. I don't know what the URL is on LinkedIn because they don't really do it that way, but we're on at Constructive. I'm on there as well. Those are probably the best ways.
We'll include all the links and the show notes, but just in case somebody's listening right now and they go, I have to contact Matt right now. So you can definitely
if someone really has to contact me right now, I look forward to hearing from them.
Absolutely. And, before we end off, I have to give a big shout out to John Corcoran from Rise 25, who introduced us through the Digital Bureau, right? I mean, that's where you both belong to that group.
Yeah, the Bureau of Digital, which is a fantastic organization. Yeah, for agency owners and I think solopreneurs as well. It was always originally agency owners, but digital and branding shops, a really great community.
This is the Bureau of Digital, and I actually had a whole episode where I interviewed Carl, who is the founder of that group, and it's a great interview where he talks about that group. So I'll include that one in the show notes as well. So we give Carl a shout out for eventually, it's the introduction through Carl, through John. So there you go.
Carl's good people.
Yes, absolutely. Matt, it's been a pleasure having you on this podcast. You're a wealth of information. It's very obvious that you're super organized, have the systems in place, and that's why you're really able to help your clients, which in turn, they help the world to make an impact. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Adi. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.